My name is Gage, and I'm 33 years old. Never in my life did I imagine receiving court papers served by my own parents. After 12 years of grinding, saving every penny, and finally buying my dream home, I got a summons claiming I owed them $500,000, all because they believed my little brother deserved my house more than I did. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. If you're watching this while house hunting or dealing with family drama, drop your location in the comments and hit subscribe to follow my unbelievable journey. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago in the 90s, I learned pretty early on that my place in our family hierarchy was firmly second tier. From the moment my brother Alan was born when I was 7, my parents Jackson and Elaine made it clear that he was their golden child. At first, it was subtle. Alan always got the new toys while I got hand-me-downs or cheaper versions of what I asked for. I told myself it was because he was the baby of the family and things would even out eventually. They never did. When I was 10, I won first place in my school science fair with a project on renewable energy that I spent weeks perfecting. My parents promised they would be there for the awards ceremony. The morning of the event, Alan had a soccer practice that wasn't even a game, just a regular practice. Mom and Dad decided that was more important. I stood alone on stage, accepting my blue ribbon, scanning the audience for faces that never appeared. My teacher drove me home afterward, and my parents barely acknowledged my achievement when I walked through the door, too busy praising Alan for scoring a goal during practice. That was the day something shifted inside me. I realized I would need to become self-reliant if I wanted to achieve anything in life. While Alan grew increasingly dependent on our parents for everything, I developed independence. By 13, I was mowing lawns in the neighborhood to earn money for things I wanted. By 16, I had a formal part-time job at the local grocery store, saving every dollar I could. Meanwhile, Alan received a generous allowance just for existing. The dynamics in our household were complicated by our parents' careers. Dad was a successful real estate developer who worked long hours and traveled frequently for business. Mom taught 4th grade at the elementary school and primarily managed our day-to-day lives. Dad's success in real estate planted a seed in my mind early on. I began to dream of owning my own home someday, a place that would be totally mine, where no one could tell me I was less important. That dream grew stronger every year as I continued sharing a tiny bedroom with Alan, who was the messiest person I'd ever known. His clutter constantly invaded my carefully kept side of the room. When I complained, my parents would say, "Just be more understanding. You're older and should know better." The most painful inequity came on my 18th birthday. I had been researching colleges, preparing applications, and studying hard to maintain my GPA. I assumed, like most of my friends' parents, that mine had been saving for my education. The birthday dinner started normally, until my parents handed me an envelope. Inside wasn't a check for college as I'd hoped, but a letter explaining that they hadn't saved anything for my education. The letter ended with, "We know you're smart and capable enough to figure this out on your own. We're saving our education fund for Alan because he'll need more support than you do." I couldn't believe what I was reading. When I questioned them, my father simply said, "You've always been independent, Gage. You'll find a way. Alan isn't as naturally driven as you are." That night, I cried silently in my bed after everyone was asleep. Then I dried my tears and started researching scholarships. For the remainder of my senior year, I applied for every scholarship I could find. I increased my work hours, taking weekend shifts and closing shifts on school nights. I built a spreadsheet tracking application deadlines and requirements, staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning many nights to complete essays. When the acceptance letters started coming in, I had to make my decision based entirely on financial aid packages. Meanwhile, my parents casually mentioned that they were already touring private universities for Alan, despite him being only 11 years old. "We want to start planning early," my mother explained, "so he has the best opportunities." The day I left for State University with my belongings packed into my used car, my parents hugged me perfunctorily at the door. As I pulled out of the driveway, I heard my mother reminding my father they needed to look at summer camps for Alan that weekend. I drove away with a mixture of sadness and determination, vowing that someday I would build the life I deserved, even if the people who should have supported me the most couldn't see my worth. My transition to college was brutal. While most freshmen were worried about fitting in socially or keeping up with coursework, I was juggling a full course load with multiple jobs. Within the first week, I secured a position at the campus bookstore, working 20 hours weekly. That wasn't enough to cover my expenses after tuition, so I added a weekend pizza delivery job and occasional construction work whenever I could fit it in. All told, I was working over 30 hours while taking 16 credits. Sleep became a luxury. I kept a strict calendar color-coded by classes, work shifts, study blocks, and the few hours I allowed myself for basic necessities, like laundry and groceries. There were nights I'd get back to my dorm room at 1 in the morning after a late pizza delivery shift, only to crack open textbooks because an assignment was due the next day. My academic performance suffered initially. I'd always been a straight-A student in high school, but my first semester GPA was a disappointing 3.2. My scholarship required maintaining at least a 3, so I was dangerously close to losing the financial support I desperately needed. I adjusted my strategy, becoming ruthlessly efficient with my time. I recorded lectures to listen to while folding pizza boxes. I created flashcards to review during short breaks at the bookstore. Slowly, my grades improved. Social life was an afterthought. When my hallmates were heading to parties or campus events, I was usually heading to work. Dating was virtually non-existent. I went on a few coffee dates my sophomore year, but relationships fizzled quickly when I couldn't make time for basic couple activities. One girl told me plainly, "It's like you're never actually here, Gage, even when you physically are." The one bright spot in my social landscape was my roommate Dylan. We'd been randomly assigned to share a dorm room freshman year and hit it off immediately. Dylan came from a large, boisterous family in Minnesota, with parents who supported all their kids equally. He was studying engineering on a partial academic scholarship and working part-time, so he understood hustle, though his situation wasn't quite as desperate as mine. Dylan became the closest thing to family I had during those years. He'd save me dinner when I worked late. He'd wake me up if I fell asleep studying. When I was sick with a terrible flu sophomore year and couldn't work for 3 days, he loaned me money for my share of the rent without hesitation. "You'd do the same for me," he said simply. And he was right. My trips home during breaks became increasingly rare and uncomfortable. Thanksgiving freshman year, I discovered my parents had completely renovated the house, including turning my old bedroom into a gaming room for Alan. I slept on the couch during my visit. When I mentioned this seemed unfair since I still considered it partially my home, my mother said, "Well, you're hardly ever here anymore, and Alan needs his space to develop his interests." The Christmas of my sophomore year brought the starkest reminder of where I stood. Alan, now 14, received a used but still expensive car so he could practice driving with supervision before getting his license. I received clothes from a department store. My parents couldn't understand my hurt feelings. "You should be grateful," my mother said. "These are nice clothes for job interviews. We're thinking about your future." I declared a major in computer science with a business minor, strategically choosing a field with strong job prospects. When internship application season arrived junior year, I applied to 73 positions, securing an interview with a financial services company in Chicago. I skipped 2 days of classes to take the bus home for the interview, staying with a high school friend because my parents said having me home would disrupt Alan's exam preparation schedule. The internship turned out to be a pivotal confidence boost. For 10 weeks that summer, I worked in a professional environment where my contributions were valued. My supervisor mentioned potential for a full-time position after graduation if I maintained strong performance. I called my parents to share the good news, but the conversation quickly shifted to Alan's soccer tournament and how they might need to remortgage part of the house to afford the private university he had his heart set on. By senior year, I had my career path mapped out. I maintained a 3.7 gigapascals despite my work schedule, making the dean's list my final 3 semesters. When graduation day arrived, I had secured a job offer from the company where I'd interned, starting at $52,000 annually. Not extraordinary, but a solid beginning. I graduated cum laude, walking across the stage with a strange mixture of pride and emptiness. My parents attended but left immediately after the ceremony to get back for Alan's high school awards banquet that evening. As I packed my modest apartment that night, I calculated my student loan debt, $45,000. According to my parents' casual comments over the years, they had nearly $200,000 set aside for Alan's education fund. The disparity was staggering, but I'd long since stopped expecting fairness. Before leaving my college town, I visited a quiet spot by the lake, where I'd occasionally found moments to reflect during my hectic college years. Looking out at the water, I made a promise to myself. By age 35, I would own my own home, free from family obligation or entanglement. It seemed like an impossible goal given my debt and entry-level salary, but I'd already accomplished the impossible once by putting myself through college. I could do it again. My entry-level IT position at Meridian Financial Services started 2 weeks after graduation. The $52,000 salary felt enormous compared to my college jobs, but I knew better than to inflate my lifestyle. I found the cheapest safe apartment I could, sharing with 2 other recent graduates to split costs. The place was small, outdated, and a 40-minute commute from the office, but rent was only $700 monthly as my share. I lived like I was still a broke college student. I didn't own a car, using public transportation and occasionally borrowing a company car when I needed to visit client sites. I meal prepped every Sunday, bringing lunches and eating simple dinners at home. My coworkers often ordered takeout or went out for lunch, easily spending $15 daily. That was $60 weekly. I saved just on lunch alone. My financial discipline bordered on obsession. I created elaborate spreadsheets tracking every penny spent and saved. I researched high-yield savings accounts and set up automatic transfers so 20% of each paycheck went straight to savings before I could touch it. Another 30% went to student loan payments, paying well above the minimum required. The remaining 50% covered rent, utilities, food, transportation, and the bare minimum for clothing and personal items. Social invitations often meant making tough choices. When coworkers invited me to happy hours or weekend outings, I'd calculate if I could afford it within my budget. More often than not, I declined, using work as an excuse. Some colleagues eventually stopped asking. It was lonely, but I kept my eyes on the long-term goal. Professional development became my focus outside of saving money. I took advantage of the company's tuition reimbursement program, attending night classes to earn additional certifications. I volunteered for challenging projects that no one else wanted, building my reputation as someone who could solve difficult problems. I networked strategically at company events, making connections with senior managers. The strategy paid off when I was promoted to systems analyst after 2 years, bumping my salary to $68,000. I maintained exactly the same lifestyle, channeling the entire raise into increased savings and loan payments. My discipline was paying off both professionally and financially. My phone rarely rang, except when my family needed something, and those calls invariably involved Alan. He'd started at an expensive private university but dropped out after 3 semesters, claiming it wasn't the right fit. He bounced between jobs, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. 1 month, he needed money to cover rent because he'd been fired again. Another time, his car broke down, and he couldn't afford repairs. Each time, my parents called, expecting me to help. The first few times, I sent money, naively believing it would be paid back as promised. After 3 unpaid loans, totaling almost $2,000, I finally refused the next request. My parents were furious. "He's your brother," my mother said accusingly. "You should help him. You're doing so well now." I wanted to scream that I was doing well, because I worked 60-hour weeks and lived like a monk, while Alan had every advantage handed to him and squandered it all. Instead, I calmly explained that I couldn't afford to keep supporting him. This was partially true, given my aggressive saving goals, but mostly I recognized that my help wasn't actually helping him grow up. My refusal to continue financing Alan's irresponsibility created a growing rift with my parents. Holiday invitations became less frequent. When I did visit, conversations were strained. I found myself inventing excuses to leave early. At work, I found an unexpected mentor in Marcus, a senior project manager about 15 years my senior. Marcus noticed my dedication and took an interest in my career development. Unlike my family, he saw my potential and encouraged my growth. Under his guidance, I improved my leadership skills and learned to navigate corporate politics. He became the supportive figure I'd always lacked. By year 6 at Meridian, I was promoted to project manager, with my salary increasing to $85,000. Still, I maintained my frugal lifestyle. By this point, some might have expected me to relax my financial discipline, but I was more motivated than ever. At 29, I made the final payment on my student loans, a moment I celebrated alone in my apartment with an uncharacteristic splurge on a $20 bottle of wine. Being debt-free accelerated my savings exponentially. Now I could direct half my take-home pay straight to my house fund. I set up a separate high-yield account specifically for this purpose, watching with satisfaction as the balance grew month by month. When I hit $100,000 in savings at 31, I allowed myself a rare moment of pride. I wanted to share this milestone with someone, but realized there was no one in my life who would truly understand what it meant to me. My parents would only see it as money that could help Alan. My few friends would think I was showing off. I continued living well below my means. While coworkers bought new cars and took international vacations, I still rode the bus and considered a weekend trip to a nearby state park a major indulgence. Some people at work thought I was strange or antisocial. Others assumed I was supporting a secret family or had gambling debts. The truth was far simpler and far more personal. Every dollar saved brought me closer to the security I'd craved since childhood. The holidays became increasingly difficult as I maintained boundaries with Alan. The year I refused to co-sign an apartment lease for him after he'd been evicted twice, my parents informed me it would be easier for everyone if I skipped Thanksgiving. I spent the day with Marcus and his family instead, experiencing for the first time what a holiday could feel like without underlying tension. My determination only strengthened. By 33, I was 2 years ahead of my saving schedule. with nearly $200,000 set aside for a house down payment. The goal that once seemed impossible was now within reach. I began researching neighborhoods, mortgage rates, and the home buying process, preparing for the next major step in my journey toward true independence. At 33, I was finally ready to meet with a mortgage broker. Sandra Kim came highly recommended by Marcus, who had worked with her on his own home purchase years earlier. Our first meeting was eye-opening, based on my savings, income, and perfect credit score. She pre-approved me for a mortgage up to $450,000. "You're in an excellent position, Gage," Sandra said, reviewing my financial documents. "Most clients your age don't have this kind of down payment saved or such a strong debt-to-income ratio. You've clearly been planning this for a while." Armed with my pre-approval letter, I began house hunting with cautious optimism. The Chicago housing market quickly dampened my enthusiasm. Prices had risen significantly in recent years, and properties in my target neighborhoods received multiple offers within days of listing. My first 3 offers were rejected in favor of all cash buyers, or those willing to waive contingencies I wasn't comfortable skipping. Every weekend for 6 months, I toured houses. Weeknights were spent researching neighborhoods, property taxes, and school districts, even though I had no children. I wanted to ensure I was making a sound investment. The process was exhausting, especially while maintaining my full-time job and continued saving habits. As months passed with no success, I expanded my search area, looking at neighborhoods I hadn't initially considered. That's when I found it. A 1930s craftsman-style home in Oakwood Heights, an area undergoing revitalization. The house sat on a corner lot with mature oak trees and a deep front porch. The listing photos showed worn interiors that had been largely untouched since the 70s, explaining the relatively reasonable asking price of $390,000. The moment I walked through the front door, something felt different. Unlike other properties that I'd evaluated with clinical detachment, this house stirred an emotional response. Original hardwood floors ran throughout, though they needed refinishing. Built-in bookshelves flanked a brick fireplace in the living room. The kitchen was outdated, but spacious, with windows overlooking a small backyard. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms featured charming details like window seats and closets, with vintage hardware. The selling agent explained that the house had been owned by the same couple for 50 years. The husband had passed away, and the elderly widow was moving to assisted living near her daughter in Arizona. Though neglected in recent years, the house had been well built and maintained for most of its life. It needed updates, but had good bones, as they say in real estate. I tried to maintain a poker face, but I think the agent sensed my connection to the property. "The family is motivated to sell quickly," she mentioned casually. "They've already had 2 offers fall through because buyers couldn't secure financing. They might appreciate a buyer with solid pre-approval and a significant down payment." That evening, I calculated and recalculated my numbers. The house was at the upper end of my budget, and renovations would require additional funds. But something about this place felt right in a way no other property had. After consulting with Sandra, I submitted an offer of $380,000 with standard contingencies for inspection and financing. 2 anxious days later, my offer was accepted. The negotiations had been straightforward, with the sellers appreciating my strong financial position and flexibility. On the closing date, I scheduled the home inspection immediately, holding my breath until the results came back. There were issues, of course. The electrical system needed updating. The roof had 5 years of life left at most, and the hot water heater was on its last legs. But the foundation was solid, the plumbing mostly sound, and no major structural problems were identified. With the inspection contingency satisfied, the mortgage process began in earnest. Despite my excellent financial position, the weeks of underwriting felt interminable. Each request for additional documentation or clarification sent my anxiety spiraling. What if something in my financial history raised a red flag? What if the appraisal came in too low? I continued going to work each day, trying to focus on my projects while my phone burned a hole in my pocket, always waiting for news from the mortgage company. Finally, the day arrived. I sat in a conference room at the title company, signing document after document, until my hand cramped. The closing costs depleted most of my remaining savings, but I had planned for this, maintaining a separate emergency fund untouched by the house purchase. When the seller's agent handed me the keys, a wave of emotion hit me unexpectedly. After 12 years of grinding, sacrificing, and saving, I had achieved what once seemed impossible. I owned a home. Moving in was a humble affair. My apartment furnishings looked sparse in the larger space, but I didn't care. That first night, I sat on my one couch in the otherwise empty living room, listening to the sounds of my house settling. My house. The phrase felt foreign, but wonderful. The next day, I invited Dylan, who had moved to Chicago 2 years earlier, and Marcus to see the place. They brought champagne and takeout, and we celebrated in the kitchen using moving boxes as chairs. Their genuine happiness for me meant more than they could know. "This is incredible, Gage," Dylan said, looking around. "I remember when you used to fall asleep studying because you'd worked a double shift. Look at you now, homeowner." Marcus raised his plastic cup in a toast to determination and proving everyone wrong. After my friends left, I considered whether to share the news with my family. Part of me wanted to keep this achievement private, protecting it from their inevitable dismissal, or attempt to connect it to Alan somehow. But another part, perhaps the little boy, who still wanted his parents' approval, urged me to call them. Surely purchasing a home would finally earn their recognition. The next morning I called my parents. My mother answered, sounding distracted as usual. "Mom, I have some news to share," I began, trying to keep the excitement in my voice. "I bought a house." There was a pause. Then, "A house? Where? How much was it?" No congratulations, no happiness. Just practical questions that felt more like an interrogation than interest. I answered anyway, describing the property and neighborhood. "That seems expensive for that area," she commented. "Does it need a lot of work? You know your father could have helped you find something better if you'd asked." I felt the familiar disappointment settling in my chest. "It's exactly what I wanted, Mom. I'm really happy with it." "Well, I suppose that's what matters then. Have you told Alan? He's been looking at apartments recently." And there it was, the inevitable pivot to Alan. I ended the call shortly after, promising to send photos, but knowing they'd probably never ask to see them. As I hung up, I looked around at my new home and made a decision. This house would be my sanctuary, a place where I defined my worth, not anyone else. The day after my conversation with my mother, my phone rang with Alan's name on the screen. We spoke infrequently, usually only when he needed something. So I answered with trepidation. "Is it true you bought a house?" he demanded without greeting. "Mom said you closed last week. How could you afford that? Did you get money from somewhere?" His tone caught me off guard. "Hello to you too, Alan." "Yes, I bought a house after saving for years and getting a mortgage like most people do." "But you're only 33, he persisted. Nobody our age can afford houses in Chicago without help. Did someone give you money? An inheritance? Or something I don't know about? The implication was clear. In his mind, my achievement couldn't possibly be the result of my own efforts. No, Alan. I saved aggressively since college, lived well below my means, and worked my way up at my company. That's it. He made a skeptical sound. Whatever. Must be nice to have everything work out so perfectly for you all the time. The conversation ended awkwardly, leaving me with a sour feeling. I tried to brush it off, focusing instead on settling into my new home. I'd taken a week off work to handle the move and begin addressing the most urgent updates, starting with the electrical system. 1 week after moving in, I was in the middle of unpacking my kitchen when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my parents standing on the porch, looking oddly formal in clothing more suited to a business meeting than a family visit. They hadn't called to say they were coming, and I lived over an hour from their house. "Surprise," my mother said with a tight smile. "We thought we'd come see this house of yours." Caught off guard, I invited them in. My father immediately began a critical assessment, pointing out issues I was already well aware of. The dated kitchen, the uneven flooring in one bedroom, the inefficient windows. My mother commented that the neighborhood didn't seem very safe, despite it being statistically safer than where they lived. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, trying to maintain a hospitable tone despite their undercutting remarks. They accepted, and we moved to the living room, the only fully furnished space so far. An uncomfortable silence fell as they perched on the edge of my couch, looking around with expressions I couldn't quite read. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Gage, we need to discuss something important. This house, well, there's an issue with how you've acquired it." I stared at him, genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "I saved for the down payment and got a mortgage. Everything was above board and legally sound." My father exchanged a look with my mother before continuing. "The money you used, it wasn't entirely yours to spend this way. This house should have been Alan's, or at least partially his." The statement was so absurd I almost laughed. But their serious expressions stopped me. "What are you talking about?" "I saved every penny myself." My mother leaned forward. "Your grandmother left a trust fund of $50,000 to be shared between you and Alan when you both turned 25. Your father and I were trustees. We invested it for both of you. This was the first I'd ever heard of any trust fund. My maternal grandmother had died when I was 12, and while she'd always been kind to me, she hadn't been wealthy by any means." "That's not possible," I said slowly. "No one ever told me about any trust fund. We didn't want you boys fighting over it," my father explained, his tone patronizing. "The plan was always to use it for major life expenses that would benefit both of you. A family vacation property, perhaps, or investment in a business you could run together." My mind was racing. Even if this trust existed, which I highly doubt, 50,000 split 2 ways is 25,000 each. My down payment was significantly more than that. The original amount, plus interest and investments over the years, would equal approximately 500,000 now, my father stated firmly. "You've essentially taken Alan's share by using it all on this house." The absurdity of the claim was staggering. "Dad, that's a ridiculous return that no investment could realistically achieve." And again, no one ever mentioned this money to me. I've been working and saving since I was 16 years old. Every dollar in my accounts came from my own earnings. My mother's expression hardened. "We didn't think we needed to explain everything to you. As the older brother, We expected you to look out for Alan's interests naturally. The conversation devolved from there. I asked for documentation of this alleged trust fund, which they claimed was at home in the safe. I pointed out that I'd never received any financial statements, tax documents, or other indicators that such a fund existed. They insisted that they had handled all the paperwork as trustees. As the argument escalated, my father finally stood up, face flushed with anger. You need to do right by your brother, Gage. Either buy him out for his fair share, or put the house in both your names. There's nothing to buy out, I exclaimed, my own temper rising. This is my house that I purchased with my money. Alan has no claim to it whatsoever. My father grabbed his coat. You'll be hearing from our lawyer if you don't resolve this properly. We raised you better than this, to steal from your own brother. They stormed out, leaving me standing in my living room, shell-shocked and confused. Had I somehow missed knowledge of a trust fund? It seemed impossible, yet the conviction in their voices had been absolute. That night, I couldn't sleep. I dug through old financial records, tax returns, everything I could find from my teen years forward. Nothing indicated any trust fund or inheritance. The next day, I called my mother's sister, Aunt Linda, who had always been more reasonable than my parents. Trust fund? She repeated, sounding puzzled. Gage, your grandmother barely had enough saved for her own retirement. She left personal items to you kids, but there was no money. I handled her estate with your mother. There was no trust fund. Over the next week, I spoke with other extended family members, all of whom confirmed what I already knew. My grandmother had not left a trust fund. Whatever game my parents were playing, it was based on a fabrication. Armed with this information, I invited my parents to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop near their home. I presented what I'd learned from other family members, challenging them to produce any documentation of the alleged trust. Rather than backing down, they doubled down on their claims. My mother insisted that the other family members didn't know the full story and that special provisions had been made privately. My father threatened legal action again, this time with more specific language about fraud and misappropriation of funds. I left the meeting more confused than ever. Were my parents delusional? Deliberately lying? Had they somehow convinced themselves this money existed? Whatever the case, their threat of legal action now seemed very real. The next few weeks passed in a haze of anxiety. I threw myself into house projects, trying to distract from the family drama. Alan sent alternating text messages, some pleading for his share of the money, others expressing confusion about the situation, and still others accusing me of always thinking I was better than him. I stopped responding after trying several times to explain there was no trust fund to share. Exactly 30 days after I closed on the house, a courier delivered an envelope to my door. Inside was a formal summons. My parents were suing me for $500,000, claiming misappropriation of trust funds and breach of fiduciary duty. The lawsuit named both me and Alan as beneficiaries of the trust, with my parents as trustees claiming to act on Alan's behalf. Looking at the official court documents, I felt a complex wave of emotions: shock that they'd actually followed through on their threats, anger at the false accusations, and a deep sadness that my achievement had been twisted into something ugly. My sanctuary, my hard-earned home, was now at the center of a legal battle with my own family. The summons left me paralyzed for several days. I couldn't focus at work, barely slept, and found myself staring at walls for long stretches, trying to process what was happening. The allegations in the lawsuit were completely fabricated, yet presented with legal terminology that made them sound legitimate. Breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of trust assets, unjust enrichment. The financial implications were terrifying. Even if I won the case, legal fees could deplete my emergency savings and possibly force me to take out a second mortgage on the house I'd just purchased. If by some nightmare scenario I lost, I would face financial ruin. After the initial shock wore off, I began researching attorneys. The first consultation was with a general practice lawyer who charged $300 for an hour of his time, only to tell me I needed someone specializing in trust litigation. The second attorney seemed more knowledgeable, but quoted a retainer of $10,000. The third wanted to settle immediately, suggesting I offer my parents a significant sum just to make the problem go away. None of these options felt right. Then Marcus recommended Jessica Reynolds, an attorney who had helped his sister through a complex family financial dispute. "She's tough, but fair," Marcus said, "and she doesn't back down from bullies." Jessica's office was small but professional, and she listened attentively as I explained the situation, taking detailed notes. When I finished, she looked up with clear, assessing eyes. "Let me make sure I understand. Your parents claim there was a trust fund established by your grandmother when you were a child. They, as trustees, allegedly invested this money until it grew to approximately $500,000. Now they're claiming you used these trust funds to purchase your home, essentially stealing your brother's share. But you have no knowledge of this trust ever existing, and family members confirm there was no such trust." "That's exactly right," I confirmed. She tapped her pen against her notepad. "Do you have your financial records? Bank statements showing the source of your down payment? Employment verification? For the past several years?" I nodded. "I keep meticulous records. I can show every dollar that went into my house fund came from my earnings." "Good. We'll need all of that." She set her pen down decisively. "Mr. Harrison, based on what you've told me, this case appears to be without merit. However, defending yourself will still require time and resources. I'd like to represent you, if you're comfortable with my approach. I don't believe in dragging out litigation unnecessarily. But I also don't believe in rewarding false claims with settlements." Her retainer was still significant but more reasonable than the others. And something in her straightforward manner gave me confidence. I hired her that day. The next weeks were consumed with building my defense. I gathered 12 years of bank statements, showing regular deposits from legitimate employers and systematic transfers to my savings accounts. I collected employment records confirming my salary progression. I obtained written statements from extended family members regarding my grandmother's estate. Meanwhile, Jessica initiated the discovery process, formally requesting all documentation related to the alleged trust fund from my parents' attorney. Their responses were vague and evasive. They produced no trust instrument, no bank statements, no tax returns reflecting trust activity, and no correspondence with financial institutions managing the purported funds. "This is going well for us," Jessica assured me during a progress meeting. "They're failing to produce basic documentation that would exist if their claims were legitimate." The deposition phase was emotionally brutal. Sitting across a conference table from my parents while they testified under oath, I watched them struggle to provide specifics. My father claimed the trust had been managed through various investments, but couldn't name specific funds or accounts. My mother insisted there had been paperwork at some point that must have been misplaced during a move. Most revealing was Alan's deposition. Under questioning from Jessica, he admitted he had never been told about a trust fund until after I purchased my house. Further pressed, he revealed something that made my heart sink. "Mom and Dad always said Gage would take care of me," he stated. "They told me he was saving money for both of us, and when the time was right, he would help me buy a house too. When he bought one just for himself, They said he had gone back on the family plan. The pieces finally clicked into place. My parents had apparently been telling Alan for years that my hard work and saving would somehow benefit him eventually. Rather than encouraging him to develop his own financial discipline, they had fostered an expectation that he was entitled to the fruits of my labor. As the case progressed, the judge assigned to our case, Judge Martina Rodriguez, showed increasing skepticism toward my parents' claims. During a preliminary hearing, she questioned their attorney sharply about the lack of documentation. "Counselor, am I to understand that your clients claim to have managed a substantial trust for over 20 years without maintaining any records whatsoever?" she asked. My parents' attorney attempted to argue that informal family arrangements didn't always follow standard protocols, but the judge was unimpressed. She denied their motion for an immediate injunction against my property and ordered them to produce specific documentation by the next hearing or face potential dismissal. Jessica offered to arrange settlement discussions, but I refused. "I'm not giving them $1 for a trust that never existed," I told her firmly. "This isn't about money anymore. It's about truth." The day of the trial arrived 6 months after the initial summons. I took a week off work, unable to focus on anything else. Marcus and Dylan both took days off to attend court with me, providing moral support that meant more than they could know. Several co-workers also showed up unexpectedly, having heard about my situation through office conversations. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from television dramas, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting. My parents and Alan sat on the opposite side of the aisle, not looking in my direction. My father appeared confident, my mother nervous, and Alan confused. Jessica's opening statement was powerful in its simplicity. "Your Honor, this case ultimately comes down to documentation. The plaintiffs claim a trust existed. The defendant has provided extensive records, proving the source of his home down payment was his own earned income, systematically saved over many years. The plaintiffs have failed to produce a single document substantiating the existence of the alleged trust. We believe the evidence will clearly show this lawsuit is without merit." My parents' attorney spoke about family obligations and verbal understandings, but the lack of concrete evidence was glaring. As exhibits were presented, the disparity became increasingly obvious. My side had hundreds of pages of meticulous financial records. Their side had vague testimony and a few irrelevant family photographs meant to establish my grandmother's relationship with us. The pivotal moment came when Judge Rodriguez directly questioned my father about the trust administration. "Sir, if you were acting as trustee of a substantial fund for your sons, did you ever file tax returns for the trust?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "We handled that through our personal returns. That would be improper for a trust of this nature," the judge noted. "Did you ever provide accounting statements to the beneficiaries?" "We didn't want to create competition between the boys," he replied. "Did you create annual trustee reports, as required by law?" "I wasn't aware those were necessary for a family arrangement." Her expression made clear she found his answers inadequate. After 2 days of testimony and evidence presentation, Judge Rodriguez delivered her ruling. Based on the complete lack of documentation supporting the existence of any trust fund, and the substantial evidence that the defendant purchased his home using personal savings from earned income, this court finds in favor of the defendant. The case is dismissed with prejudice. Relief flooded through me, so intense I nearly missed her additional comments directing my parents to pay my legal fees due to the frivolous nature of their claims. Outside the courtroom, Jessica shook my hand firmly. "Congratulations, Gage. Truth prevailed today." My celebration was short-lived. As we exited the courthouse, my parents approached. My father's face flushed with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You've embarrassed us in public and betrayed your family. You're no longer our son, as far as we're concerned." My mother stood silently beside him, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. They turned and walked away without another word. The finality of the moment hit me hard. I'd won the case but lost my family, though in truth, I wondered if I'd ever really had their support to begin with. As Marcus and Dylan led me toward the parking lot, discussing plans for a celebration dinner, Alan approached alone, hanging back from our group. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked quietly. "Just you." I hesitated, then nodded to my friends to give us space. Alan looked different somehow, smaller and less confident than the entitled person who had demanded my house months earlier. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Mom and Dad have been telling me for years that you were the golden child, that everything came easy to you, and that you owed me because of that. They convinced me I deserved part of your success, just for being your brother." He looked down at his shoes. "I never knew about all the jobs you worked or how you struggled in college. They always made it sound like you had secret advantages or help I didn't know about. I'm starting to think maybe they lied about a lot of things." The apology was imperfect, but surprisingly honest. For the first time, I saw my brother as another victim in our parents' dysfunctional family system, rather than my adversary. It didn't erase the pain of the lawsuit or years of favoritism, but it cracked open a door I thought had been permanently closed. "Thank you for telling me that," I said simply. We didn't hug or make dramatic reconciliation promises. The damage was too fresh for that. But as he walked away, I felt a complexity of emotions I couldn't have anticipated when this legal battle began. Victory mixed with loss. Relief tangled with grief. And, underneath it all, a strange new hope that truth, however painful, might eventually lead to healing. The weeks following the court victory were surprisingly difficult. I'd expected to feel triumphant and vindicated. Instead, I felt emotionally drained and oddly empty. The legal battle had consumed my thoughts for months, and its absence left a void. More significantly, the final rupture with my parents triggered grief I hadn't anticipated. Despite years of unequal treatment and their recent betrayal, they were still my parents, and some childlike part of me mourned the relationship I'd always hoped we might someday have. At Marcus's insistence, I started seeing a therapist specializing in family trauma. Dr. Winters helped me understand that my feelings were normal, that I was grieving not just the loss of my actual family, but the idealized family I'd never had. "You're mourning the parents you deserved but didn't get," she explained during one particularly insightful session. "That's legitimate grief." I channeled much of my emotional energy into home renovation projects. There was something healing about transforming the house that had become the focal point of so much conflict. I refinished the hardwood floors myself, spending weekends sanding and staining until my hands were raw but my mind was quieter. I painted every room, choosing colors that felt calming and restorative. The physical labor provided both distraction and tangible progress I could see daily. Practical steps toward protection became necessary too. I changed my phone number after my parents made several attempts to contact me with continued accusations. I installed a security system with cameras, not expecting any physical threat but needing the peace of mind. I updated my will and other legal documents to explicitly exclude my parents from any decision-making authority in case of emergency. More importantly, I invested in the relationships that had sustained me throughout the ordeal. Marcus, Dylan, and several coworkers who had stood by me became my chosen family. We established regular dinner gatherings, game nights, and weekend outings. These connections, based on mutual respect and genuine care, began filling the emotional spaces left vacant by family rejection. 6 months after the court case, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was Alan, asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed with cautious optimism, suggesting a cafe halfway between our homes. He arrived looking significantly different than during the court proceedings. His clothes were more modest, his demeanor less entitled. Over the next hour, he shared how his perspective had shifted dramatically. After I talked to you at the courthouse, Mom and Dad were furious, he explained. When I suggested maybe they had been wrong about the trust fund, they basically cut me off financially, said I was choosing you over family loyalty. For the first time in his adult life, Alan had been forced to support himself completely. He'd found a job at a retail store, moved to a modest apartment with roommates, and was learning to budget. The transition had been brutal, but enlightening. I never realized how much I'd been manipulated until they weren't controlling my life anymore, he admitted. Looking back, I can see how they constantly pitted us against each other. They'd tell me you thought you were better than me, then probably told you I was entitled and lazy. His insights matched patterns I'd recognized in therapy. Our parents had created a dynamic where Alan was dependent and entitled while I was self-sufficient, but emotionally disconnected. Neither position had been healthy, and both had served our parents' need to maintain control. This coffee meeting didn't instantly repair our relationship, but it opened a door to something new. We agreed to occasional text check-ins, a careful rebuilding of trust between brothers who were essentially getting to know each other for the first time without parental interference. When the 1-year anniversary of my house purchase arrived, I hosted a small gathering I called a real housewarming. Marcus, Dylan, co-workers who had become friends, and yes, even Alan attended. As I looked around at the people filling my home with conversation and laughter, I realized I'd created something more valuable than property ownership. I'd built a community of authentic connections. My professional life continued to flourish. 2 years after the lawsuit, I was promoted to senior project manager at Meridian, with responsibility for our largest client accounts. The position came with a substantial salary increase that I no longer needed to funnel entirely into savings, allowing for a more balanced lifestyle while maintaining financial security. The house transformed alongside me. What had once been a worn property with good bones became a comfortable, welcoming home. I renovated the kitchen with help from friends who had various skills. Marcus's husband taught me basic plumbing, saving thousands on bathroom updates. A co-worker's sister, an interior designer, helped me choose furnishings that reflected my personality rather than just basic functionality. Alan's journey continued in parallel. He secured a more stable job in customer service, then moved to a sales position with better prospects. He got his own apartment, small but entirely his. Most significantly, he began therapy to address the patterns instilled by our parents. Our relationship developed slowly but steadily, based on adult mutual respect rather than childhood rivalry or obligation. 2.5 years after the lawsuit, I hosted a proper housewarming party, signifying that both the home and I had completed major phases of renovation. The gathering included my chosen family and, notably, Alan, who arrived with a housewarming gift he'd saved for weeks to purchase. That evening, sitting on my back deck with a small group of close friends as the party wound down, I found myself reflecting on the journey. Marcus noticed my contemplative mood. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked. "I was just thinking about how different this house feels now compared to when I first moved in," I replied. "It's like the legal battle, and all that ugliness has been cleansed away, replaced by something better." Dylan raised his glass. "To chosen family and second chances." As everyone clinked glasses, I felt a sense of completion. The betrayal that had threatened to taint my achievement had instead catalyzed a deeper healing. Through the process of defending what was rightfully mine, I had discovered what truly mattered wasn't the property itself, but the authenticity and self-respect it represented. This house isn't just walls and a roof I bought with my savings. It's proof that we can rebuild our lives on our own terms, even when those who should support us the most try to tear us down. Sometimes, the strongest foundations are the ones we pour ourselves, right over the cracks of our broken past. Looking at the people gathered in my home, I felt immense gratitude. "I have a question for all of you," I said, putting down my glass. "Has anyone else experienced family members feeling entitled to your achievements? Drop your stories in the comments below. And if you found something valuable in my journey, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what you've worked for, even from family. Thanks for watching, and remember that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into.